The gate was chaos, and the agent, a man named Gary, was its angry king. He pointed a thick finger at Jordan Hayes, a woman who commanded a fleet of 100 private jets and the loyalty of 5,000 employees. The economy line, he barked, his voice dripping with condescension, starts back there. He refused to look at her first-class ticket, seeing only a black woman in a hoodie who didn't fit his profile. He didn't know that Jordan Hayes had the power to turn his gate into a ghost town. And with a single phone call from the very back of the line, he sent her to that's exactly what she was about to do. Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport on a Tuesday morning is not a place. It's a condition. It is a swirling vortex of humanity, a torrent of frantic energy anxiety, and the ever-present low-grade hum of controlled chaos. At the center of one of its many eddies was Gate B-32, where Meridian Air Flight 428 to Dallas-Fort Worth was supposed to be boarding. But nothing was going according to plan. A last-minute equipment swap on an adjacent flight had created a logistical nightmare. The passengers for 2 different flights were now crammed into one waiting area, their designated lines bleeding into one another, creating a confusing, amorphous blob of impatient travelers. Stanchions that were meant to create order had been pushed aside, and the air was thick with frustration. At the center of this storm, attempting to project an air of calm she didn't feel, was Jordan Hayes. To the world, she was the 45-year-old founder and CEO of Aerovant Guard, one of the most powerful and disruptive forces in modern aviation. Her company was the Circulatory System of the Skies, a multi-billion-dollar logistics and private charter behemoth that handled the impossible. When a human heart needed to be flown from Miami to Seattle in 90 minutes, Aerovant got the call. When a Fortune 500 company's entire board needed to be in 3 different countries in 24 hours, they called Aerovant. When a commercial airliner was grounded with a critical mechanical failure, it was often Aerovant's emergency maintenance crews and parts delivery jets that got it flying again. Jordan Hayes was a titan of the industry, a name spoken with a mixture of awe and fear in the boardrooms of every major airline. But today, she was just a traveler. She had just finished a grueling 3-day logistics conference and was flying to Dallas for a crucial meeting before heading home. For the short flight, she had eschewed her usual uniform of a razor-sharp power suit. Instead, she was dressed for comfort and anonymity in expensive but understated black joggers, a simple grey hoodie from her alma mater, Stanford, and a pair of comfortable sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried no designer handbag, just a sleek, functional backpack that held her laptop and files. She looked more like a graduate student than a CEO, and that was exactly how she liked it. Her first-class ticket for Flight 428 was her one small concession to the demands of her life. The gate agent at the podium, a man whose name tag read Gary, was not handling the chaos well. He was a portly man in his 50s, with a florid face and a palpable sense of being aggrieved by the world. Gary saw himself as a guardian of order, a thin-line defender against the unruly mob. He wasn't just checking tickets, he was passing judgment, and his judgments were swift, superficial, and colored by a lifetime of unexamined biases. He grabbed the microphone, his voice crackling with irritation. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need your attention. We are now beginning the pre-boarding process for Meridian Air, Flight 428, to Dallas, Fort Worth only. Please have your boarding passes and identification ready." He then began the call for military personnel and passengers needing special assistance. Jordan watched patiently, waiting for the call for Group 1. She saw the priority lane, marked by a faded red carpet, but it was currently occupied by a family with a stroller. The line between priority and general boarding had become hopelessly blurred. She saw a few other first-class passengers, businessmen, in suits a well-dressed older couple, loitering uncertainly near the podium, unsure where to go. This was the moment of decision. Jordan, a woman who solved logistical puzzles for a living, decided to approach the source for clarification. She walked toward the podium, maintaining a polite distance, waiting for a pause in Gary's announcements. She intended to ask a simple, quiet question. "Excuse me, where would you like Group 1 to begin lining up?" It was a question she would never get to ask. As Jordan approached the podium, Gary finished his pre-boarding announcement and looked up. His eyes scanned past the businessmen in suits and landed on her. He saw a black woman in a hoodie and joggers holding a backpack. His brain, conditioned by years of snap judgments, did not register a potential first-class passenger. It registered someone cutting the line. Before Jordan could even open her mouth to speak, he held up a thick, dismissive hand like a traffic cop halting a pedestrian. "Whoa, hold on there," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The line starts back there. You need to wait until your boarding group is called." He pointed with a thick finger toward the far end of the chaotic waiting area, a gesture of banishment. The public nature of the rebuke was stunning. Jordan froze for a second, taken aback by the sheer, unprovoked aggression. She recovered quickly, maintaining her calm, professional demeanor. "I understand," she said, her voice even. "I am in Group 1. I was just unclear on where you wanted us to queue, given the confusion here." She held up her phone, the screen displaying her boarding pass, in the bright, clear font of the Meridian Air app, Hayes, Jordan. Seat 2B. Group 1. Gary did not even glance at the phone. Looking at the phone would mean acknowledging the possibility that he was wrong, and Gary was not a man who easily admitted error. His initial judgment had been made, and all subsequent evidence would be forced to fit that narrative. "Everyone thinks they're in Group 1 today, ma'am." He scoffed, a smug, knowing smirk on his face. "The real Group 1 line is for our premier executive and first-class passengers. The general boarding line forms behind the blue stanchions. Please wait there." He was speaking to her as if she were a child, willfully misunderstanding a simple rule. The humiliation was a hot flush on Jordan's cheeks. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate public act of profiling. He had looked at her, and in one swift, prejudiced assessment, decided she was unworthy. At that moment, a young man standing nearby, a business student in a blazer who had been nervously clutching a copy of Forbes, took a hesitant step forward. A flash of recognition was in his eyes. "Excuse me, sir," he said to Gary, his voice a little shaky. "I could be wrong, but I think that's Jordan Hayes. She was on the cover of this magazine last month. She's the CEO of Aerovant Guard." He held up the magazine. On the cover was a professionally styled photograph of Jordan looking powerful and poised under the headline, "The Queen of the Skies, How Jordan Hayes Revolutionized Aviation Logistics." Jordan gave the young man a small, grateful nod. She had hoped to avoid any such recognition, but now it seemed a necessary evil to cut through this agent's bigotry. Gary, however, was not to be swayed by something as trivial as facts. He shot the student a withering glare. "Son, I don't care if she's the Queen of England. The rules are the rules. And I've got a plane to board." He turned his back on Jordan, completely dismissing her and the evidence of her identity. He picked up the microphone. "We will now begin boarding with Group 1. Our first-class passengers and premier executive members may now board through the priority lane. The businessmen in suits and the other passengers who fit Gary's profile of wealth moved forward." Jordan stood frozen in place as the line she was supposed to be leading now filed past her. Gary took their tickets, offering them a cheerful welcome aboard, his entire demeanor transformed. He was the benevolent king to his worthy subjects. Jordan had been cast as the peasant at the gates. It was a stunning, breathtaking display of selective enforcement, a masterclass in weaponized prejudice. The humiliation was absolute. Jordan stood, stranded between the podium and the line, an island of exclusion in a sea of boarding passengers. The other travelers, the ones in the general boarding groups, were now staring openly, their faces a mixture of curiosity and pity. They had all witnessed the public dressing down, the dismissal, the utter refusal to even look at her ticket. They saw an injustice, but like most people, in a crowded, stressful airport, they were unwilling to get involved. The young MBA student, whose name was Kevin, looked at Jordan with an expression of helpless apology. He was just a kid. He had tried to help, but he was no match for the institutional arrogance of Gary. As his own boarding group was called, he gave her one last sympathetic glance and was swallowed by the crowd. Jordan knew she had a choice. She could retreat, wait until the end of boarding, and deal with this humiliating mistake quietly. Or she could escalate. Jordan Hayes had not built a multi-billion-dollar company by retreating. With a deep, steadying breath, she walked back to the podium. Gary was busy scanning tickets, and he ignored her for a full minute, letting her stand there like a supplicant. Finally, with an exasperated sigh, he looked up. "What did I tell you? You are holding up the process. Step away from the podium." "I will not," Jordan said, her voice no longer calm. It was quiet, but it was now laced with the cold, hard authority she used to command boardrooms. "You have publicly refused me the service for which I have paid. You have refused to verify my ticket. You have refused to acknowledge evidence of my identity. I am now requesting to speak with your direct supervisor, immediately." The word supervisor was a trigger. It was a challenge to his absolute authority in his small kingdom. Gary's face reddened. "Fine," he spat. "You want to talk to Brenda? You can talk to Brenda." He keyed the intercom behind the desk. "Brenda, I've got a code 3 at B32, a passenger refusing to follow crew member instructions." Code 3 was an exaggeration, a piece of jargon designed to frame Jordan as a disruptive, potentially dangerous passenger. A few moments later, a woman in her late 40s, her supervisor's uniform slightly rumpled, bustled through the crowd. This was Brenda. She had the weary, cynical air of a manager who had seen it all and was impressed by none of it. Her primary goal was not to solve problems, but to make them disappear as quickly as possible so she could get to her next coffee break. She didn't even make eye contact with Jordan at first. She spoke directly to Gary. "What's the problem, Gary? We're already 10 minutes behind schedule on this departure." "This passenger," Gary said, gesturing to Jordan with a contemptuous flick of his head, "is insisting she's in Group 1. I've explained the line is for premier flyers only, but she won't listen. Now she's demanding to see you holding up the whole gate." He had expertly framed the narrative. He was the diligent employee, and Jordan was the irrational, demanding customer. Brenda finally turned her gaze on Jordan, her expression a mask of profound impatience. "Ma'am," she began, her voice dripping with false empathy. "I understand that boarding can be a confusing process. My agent is simply trying to maintain order and ensure an on-time departure for the other 160 passengers. If you just wait in the designated line until your group is called, we can get you on your way." Jordan was stunned by the woman's complete lack of curiosity. She hadn't asked for Jordan's side of the story. She hadn't asked to see the ticket. She had accepted her subordinate's biased account as absolute fact. This was no longer about one rogue agent. It was a failure of leadership. "He is not maintaining order," Jordan stated, her voice icy. "He is engaging in discriminatory profiling. He has refused to look at my first-class boarding pass. Are you going to look at it? Or are you also going to refuse me service based on my appearance. Brenda's weary expression hardened. She was not interested in a debate about ethics. She was interested in compliance. I'm not going to debate policy with you. My agent has given you a simple, lawful instruction. Please step behind the stanchions and wait for your group. If you continue to disrupt the boarding process, I will have no choice but to call airport police and have you removed from the gate. The threat was the final unforgivable insult. She was now being threatened with arrest for politely insisting on her rights as a paying customer. Brenda then turned to Gary, and in an act of performative solidarity, physically moved one of the heavy metal stanchions to create a barrier between Jordan and the priority lane. She had literally drawn a red line on the floor. Jordan looked at the stanchion, then at the two smug, self-satisfied faces of the airline employees. They had judged her, convicted her, and sentenced her to the back of the line. They believed they had won. A strange, cold calm descended over Jordan. She gave Brenda a single, long, unblinking look. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away from the podium. She did not go to the back of the economy line. She walked to a quiet corner of the gate area, leaned against the wall, and pulled out her phone. The time for de-escalation was over. The time for consequences had begun. Jordan Hayes stood in her designated corner of exile, the chaotic noise of Gate B32 fading into an irrelevant hum. The public humiliation, the condescension, the sheer injustice of it all, those feelings were real, but she compartmentalized them with the practiced discipline of a surgeon. Emotion was a luxury she could not afford. What she needed now was action. Precise, strategic, and overwhelmingly decisive action. She scrolled through the contacts on her phone, bypassing her personal assistants, her legal team, and even her company's COO. She went straight to the top of her own operational food chain, to the one man whose job it was to be the master of her company's vast, complex, and powerful machinery. She dialed the number for Marcus Thorne, the Executive Vice President of Global Operations for Aerovant Guard. Marcus was a former Air Force logistics colonel, a man who thought in terms of asset deployment, critical paths, and absolute mission success. He ran Aerovant's 24/7 Global Operations Center, a high-tech nerve center known internally as the Vault with military precision. He was fiercely, almost fanatically loyal to Jordan. A call from her personal cell meant one of two things: a global crisis or a declaration of war. He answered on the first ring, his voice alert and formal. "Thorne, Marcus, it's Jordan," she said, her voice stripped of all emotion, a flat, cold instrument of command. "I need your undivided attention for the next 5 minutes." "You have it, Ma'am," he replied, and she could hear the faint sound of a door closing as he moved into a secure office. "I am currently at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Gate B32, scheduled to depart on Meridian Air Flight 428 to Dallas-Fort Worth." She began reciting the facts like a field agent reporting enemy positions. "I have been denied priority boarding by the gate staff, who have refused to validate my first-class ticket and have threatened to have me removed by airport police." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Marcus Thorne was a man accustomed to dealing with plane crashes and international incidents. The idea of his boss, one of the most powerful people in the industry, being harassed by a gate agent was so profoundly absurd it momentarily short-circuited his brain. "Ma'am, please confirm," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. "It is confirmed, Marcus," she replied, "and it is no longer a customer service issue. It is now a Grade 1 partnership failure. I am invoking Clause 17 of our Master Services Agreement with Meridian Air. The Critical Support Guarantee Clause. Marcus's blood ran cold. Clause 17 was the nuclear option. It was a unique and brutal clause that Jordan had personally insisted on in all their contracts with commercial airline partners, because Aerovant often provided life-saving time-critical services, organ transports, emergency medical crews, critical maintenance support. This clause gave Aerovant the unilateral right to suspend all services to the partner airline instantly if that airline, through negligence or misconduct, impeded the travel of a key Aerovant executive, thereby jeopardizing Aerovant's ability to manage its own critical operations. It was a clause born of logistical necessity, but it was about to be deployed as a weapon of mass corporate destruction. "Understood, Ma'am Marcus," said his voice, now as cold and precise as hers. He was already typing furiously on his keyboard. "Here are your orders," Jordan commanded. "I want you to contact Frank Donovan, the COO of Meridian Air, on his private line. You will inform him that as of this moment, Aerovant Guard has suspended its master services agreement with Meridian Air continent-wide. All Aerovant assets currently supporting Meridian operations are to be grounded, recalled, or diverted, pending my further instructions." She took a breath, then delivered the killing blow. "That includes specifically Aerovant Medflight 7, the Learjet, currently on the ground in Memphis. It is scheduled to transport a donor heart that is connecting to this specific flight, Meridian 428 in Dallas, for a recipient at the Baylor University Medical Center. You will inform Mr. Donovan that Medflight 7 is now grounded due to a critical logistical failure on the part of his airline. The clock on that heart is ticking, Marcus. Make sure he understands that." The sheer breathtaking audacity of the move was signature Jordan Hayes. She wasn't just hitting them where it hurt. She was linking her personal humiliation directly to their most critical life-and-death operational needs. "Understood, Ma'am Marcus," said a note of grim admiration in his voice. "Consider it done. What are your instructions for Flight 428? Jordan looked over at the gate where the last of the passengers were shuffling down the jet bridge. She looked at Gary and Brenda, who were laughing together, sharing a joke completely oblivious to the corporate apocalypse that was about to rain down upon them. "This flight," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "goes nowhere. The Vault Aerovant guards Global Operations Center in a secure, undisclosed location outside Washington, D.C., was a cathedral of logistics. It was a dark, cool space dominated by a wall of screens displaying everything from global weather patterns to the real-time biometric data of a transplant surgeon on an Aerovant flight. It was from this room that Marcus Thorne would now conduct his symphony of chaos. The moment he disconnected the call with Jordan, he stood up and addressed the entire operations floor. His voice, the calm, authoritative bark of a military commander. "Attention. This is a Code Indigo directive authorized by the CEO. All assets currently assigned to the Meridian Air account are to be placed on immediate indefinite standby. I repeat, all Meridian support is now offline. Execute the operator's highly trained professionals accustomed to sudden crises, moved with breathtaking speed. In Memphis, the pilot of Aerovant Medflight 7, who was just about to taxi to the runway with a cooler containing a human heart, received a stark two-word message on his console hold position. His flight plan vanished from the system. He was grounded. In Miami, an Aerovant emergency maintenance team about to board a commercial flight to repair a grounded Meridian A320 in Cancun received a text message, "Return to base." Their travel authorizations were instantly revoked. In Seattle, a shipment of critical avionics, parts a multi-million-dollar component that a grounded Meridian 777 needed to fly, was physically pulled off the cargo conveyor belt by an Aerovant logistics agent just moments before it was to be loaded. Across the country, a dozen similar actions were executed in a matter of seconds. It was a quiet, digital, and devastatingly effective corporate decapitation. Aerovant Guard had severed Meridian Air's lifeline. With the operational shutdown underway, Marcus Thorne placed his second call. He dialed the private cell number of Frank Donovan, the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Air. Donovan was in a budget meeting at Meridian's Dallas headquarters. He saw the call from Marcus Thorne, and assuming it was a routine operational query, answered with a casual, friendly tone. "Marcus, my friend, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Frank, this is not a social call," Marcus replied, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I am calling to inform you that as of 11:52 a.m. Eastern Time, Aerovant Guard has, by order of our CEO, Jordan Hayes, invoked Clause 17 of our Master Services Agreement. All support services for Meridian Air are hereby suspended, effective immediately." Donovan's friendly demeanor evaporated. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Marcus, is this a joke? I have 100 planes in the air that depend on your support." "I assure you it is not a joke," Marcus said. "The suspension is due to a Grade 1 partnership failure precipitated by the actions of your ground staff in Atlanta towards our CEO. The CEO, Jordan, what about her? She's in Atlanta." Donovan was completely lost. "She is Marcus confirmed. Your gate staff at B-32 have just denied her boarding on Flight 428, refused to verify her first-class credentials, and threatened her with arrest. Our CEO is currently being held at the gate, unable to travel. As this directly impedes her ability to command our global operations, it constitutes a material breach of our agreement." Frank Donovan felt the blood drain from his face. The abstract report of a passenger incident was now a sea-level crisis. "My God, Marcus, I had no idea. It's a mistake, a horrible mistake. Let me get on the phone to the Atlanta station manager. We'll fix this. I'm afraid it's too late for a simple fix," Frank Marcus said, delivering the final crushing blow. As part of the suspension, Aerovant Medflight 7, carrying the donor heart for the transplant at Baylor, is now grounded in Memphis. That heart was scheduled to connect with the very flight your staff has prevented my CEO from boarding. According to our MedOps team, the viability of that organ expires in approximately 4 hours. The phone line went silent. Frank Donovan was no longer just dealing with a breach of contract or an insulted CEO. He was now dealing with a potential case of negligent homicide orchestrated by his own airline. The panic that seized him was primal. "Get Jordan on the phone for me, Marcus. Please," he begged. "I'm afraid that's not possible." Marcus replied, his voice utterly implacable. "My CEO's instructions were to talk to you. My instructions to you, Frank, are to fix the problem at Gate B-32. Immediately. The clock is ticking." Marcus disconnected the call. Frank Donovan sat stunned for a moment, then erupted into a frenzy of action, screaming at his assistant to get him the head of the Atlanta hub on a secure line now. The symphony of panic had reached its crescendo, and its reverberations were now hurtling toward a gate agent named Gary and a supervisor named Brenda, who had no idea they were now the two most infamous employees in the history of their airline. The chaos that Frank Donovan unleashed from his Dallas office upon the Atlanta hub was the corporate equivalent of a nuclear missile launch. His call to the Atlanta station director, a man named Bill Hargrove, was not a conversation. It was a volcanic eruption of pure, unadulterated fury. "Bill, what the hell is going on at Gate B-32? Donovan roared, his voice so loud that Hargrove had to hold the phone away from his ear. "Do you have any idea who you are detaining at that gate?" Hargrove, blindsided and terrified, stammered that he had no idea what Donovan was talking about. "Jordan Hayes." Donovan screamed. "The CEO of Aerovant Guard, our most critical fucking partner. Your people are harassing her, and because of them, a human heart for a transplant is going to expire on a tarmac in Memphis. You have 60 seconds to fix this bill, or I am personally coming to Atlanta to collect your badge and burn this hub to the ground." Bill Hargrove had never heard his boss sound like this. He slammed down the phone and sprinted from his office, grabbing his operations manager on the way. "Get on the horn to the tower. Put an indefinite ground stop on Meridian 428. Now cite a security issue, and get me Brenda, the beacon course supervisor. Find her." The panic cascaded down the chain of command with astonishing speed. In the cockpit of Flight 428, the captain, a veteran named Tom Riley, was just about to request pushback when his radio crackled to life with an urgent, unprecedented command from the control tower. "Meridian 428. Hold your position. I repeat, hold your position. You are under an indefinite ground stop by order of your airline's operations control." Captain Riley was stunned. A ground stop ordered by your own COO after the cabin was secure and the door was closed. That meant something was terribly, terribly wrong. He immediately made an announcement to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've just been advised of an unforeseen logistical issue from our operations center. We are on an indefinite hold at the gate. We apologize for the delay and will provide you with more information as soon as it becomes available." A collective groan went through the aircraft. The flight was officially inexplicably grounded. At Gate B-32, Brenda and Gary were basking in the afterglow of their victory. They had successfully repelled the unruly passenger and were beginning the paperwork to close out the flight. Brenda's walkie-talkie exploded with a frantic, garbled shout from her operations manager. "Brenda B-32, who is the passenger? You had an issue with what is her name? Hayes." "I think," Brenda replied, annoyed by the urgency. "Some woman who—" "Is it Jordan?" "Hayes!" the voice screamed. Brenda's blood turned to ice. She looked at Gary, whose smug expression was beginning to curdle into confusion. "Yes," she stammered into the radio. "That's her." The voice on the other end was a choked whisper of pure horror. "Oh, God. Brenda, you need to listen to me. That woman is the CEO of Aerovant Guard. The COO is on the warpath. The flight is grounded. He says you need to fix this right now, or we are all fired." The walkie-talkie fell from Brenda's hand and clattered to the floor. She stared at Gary, her face a mask of utter disbelief and dawning terror. Gary stared back, his mind finally belatedly connecting the dots, the young man with the magazine, the woman's unshakable confidence, the name. Aerovant Guard. He suddenly felt very, very sick. The two of them turned as if in a trance and looked across the waiting area. There in the corner, leaning against the wall, was Jordan Hayes. She was looking right at them. She wasn't smiling. She was simply watching them, her expression as calm and implacable as a hanging judge. She held the phone to her ear, as if still in the middle of the call that had just brought their world crashing down around them. The great unraveling had begun. They looked at each other, two petty tyrants who had just discovered that the peasant they had tried to banish was, in fact, the empress who owned the entire kingdom, and she had just sentenced them to corporate death. Their only question now was how to beg for a pardon. The air at Gate B-32 was no longer just tense, it was a vacuum. Jordan Hayes's ultimatum, delivered with the chilling calm of a battlefield commander, had sucked all the noise and chaos out of the area, leaving behind a silence thick with terror and disbelief. The passengers still waiting to board were frozen, no longer annoyed by the delay, but captivated by the raw, high-stakes drama unfolding before them. Those already on the plane were pressed against the windows, their faces a gallery of confusion and awe. They were witnessing the complete, real-time inversion of a power structure they had always taken for granted. Brenda and Gary stood before Jordan like defendants awaiting sentencing, the blood having drained from their faces, leaving behind pasty, terrified masks. The sheer galaxy-spanning distance between their initial assessment of this woman and the reality of her power was a cognitive dissonance so profound it had shattered their worlds. Brenda, the jaded supervisor, found her voice first a pathetic trembling thing that bore no resemblance to her earlier authoritative bark. Ms. Hayes, she began, her hands clasped in a desperate, pleading gesture. Please, on behalf of myself and my agent, we made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. There's no excuse. We were under pressure, the gate was a mess, and we misjudged. We are so profoundly sorry for the disrespect we've shown you. Gary, a man whose entire professional identity was built on a foundation of smug certainty, was now a crumbling ruin. He looked up, his eyes, glassy, with a mixture of fear and a dawning, horrifying comprehension of his own bigotry. "Ma'am, please," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the floor somewhere near her feet. I swear I was just trying to follow the procedure for orderly boarding. I didn't mean any... I would never... Please, I have a family. I've been with this airline for 22 years. Their apologies were a torrent of self-preservation, a desperate attempt to frame their deliberate, prejudiced actions as a simple, stress-induced error. Jordan listened, her expression as unmoved as a granite cliff. She had heard 1,000 such excuses from 1,000 failing executives. It was the universal language of people who were sorry not for what they had done, but for the fact that they had been caught. Your 22 years of service. Jordan replied, her voice, cutting through their pathetic pleading like a surgeon's scalpel, have apparently taught you nothing about the core responsibility of your job, which is to treat every customer with a baseline of dignity. You did not misjudge. You profiled. You did not follow procedure. You invented a procedure to validate your own biases. You looked at a paying first-class passenger, and you decided, based on nothing more than the color of her skin and the hoodie she was wearing, that she was a liar. Your apologies are noted, and they are rejected. She turned her gaze to the station director, Bill Hargrove, who was sweating profusely, despite the cool, conditioned air of the terminal. Bill, she commanded, using his first name, with an intimacy that was far more intimidating than any formal address. The first part of my ultimatum was accountability. Let's begin. Hargrove fumbled for his walkie-talkie, his hands shaking. Dispatch, this is Hargrove at B32. I need 2 ATL police officers and a corporate security liaison to my position immediately. We have a credentialing issue. He then looked at Brenda and Gary, his expression a mixture of contempt and misery. Hand them over. He ordered, his voice a low growl. Your SIDA badges. Now. The Secure Identification Display Area badge was the ultimate symbol of an airport employee's status. It was their key to the kingdom, the pass that allowed them to move through the secure hidden world behind the ticket counters and gates. For Brenda and Gary, handing over their badges was not just a procedural step. It was a ritual of excommunication. With trembling fingers, they unclipped the lanyards from around their necks. The plastic cards, which had given them so much power just 30 minutes ago, now felt like markers of their own shame. As the police officers arrived, Hargrove pointed. These 2 individuals have been suspended. Their access credentials are to be confiscated, and they are to be escorted from the airside of this airport immediately. Brenda let out a small, choked sob as an officer took the badge from her hand. Gary simply stared into the middle distance, his face a vacant mask of a man whose professional life had just ended. As they were led away, a quiet, stunned applause broke out from a few of the waiting passengers. The public humiliation they had inflicted upon Jordan was now being returned to them with interest. With the first demand met, Jordan turned her attention to the second. "Now for your COO, Bill," she said. Hargrove, looking like a man in a waking nightmare, quickly dialed his phone, and after a moment held it out to her. "He's on the line, Miss Hayes. Mr. Donovan." Jordan took the phone and put it on speaker, her voice ringing out in the now silent gate area. "Frank, this is Jordan Hayes." Frank Donovan's voice, tinny and laced with pure panic, filled the air. "Jordan. Oh my God, Jordan, I am so sorry. I have just been briefed on the utterly inexcusable behavior of my staff. It is an embarrassment to me and to our entire company. There are no words." Save the words Frank Jordan, cut in her tone, leaving no room for his practiced apologies. "I am not interested in your remorse. I am interested in your plan. You have a cancer of prejudice in your corporate culture. I want to know right now what structural changes you are going to make to cut it out. Anything, Jordan. Anything you want." Donovan's desperation was palpable. "We'll launch a full internal audit. We'll bring in consultants. We'll rewrite the training manuals. I'll put my best people on it starting this afternoon." "Not good enough," Frank Jordan replied instantly. "Your best people are the ones who created this culture of failure. Your internal audits are clearly worthless. So here is what is going to happen. You will be commissioning a top-to-bottom, fully independent audit of your company's culture training protocols and HR complaint processes. The auditing firm will be chosen by my company, Aerovant Guard. The audit will be paid for by your company. The findings will be delivered not to you, but to my general counsel, and you will implement every single one of their recommendations without negotiation. Is that understood?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jordan was not just demanding change. She was seizing control of the entire process. She was dictating the terms of their surrender. "Yes," Jordan Donovan finally said, his voice the defeated whisper of a conquered general. "Understood." "Good," Jordan said. "Now that we have an agreement, I will make my call." She disconnected the call with Donovan and immediately dialed Marcus Thorne, her own COO, also on speakerphone for all to hear. The authority in her voice was absolute. "Marcus," she commanded, "listen carefully. You are to lift the grounding order on Aerovant Medflight 7, effective immediately. The heart flies. Let's save a life today." She paused. "All other Aerovant assets, supporting Meridian Air, remain grounded. Inform Frank Donovan that the clock on his airline's institutional survival started the moment he agreed to my terms. He has a great deal of work to do. Do not let him forget it." "Understood, ma'am." Marcus's voice replied crisp and clear. Jordan hung up. She had shown them the full spectrum of her power, the capacity for ruthless system-wide destruction, and the capacity for life-saving grace. She turned to Captain Riley, who had been watching the entire exchange with a look of profound awe. "Captain," she said, her voice now calm and professional, "I believe you have a flight to Dallas. I'd like to be on it." The unraveling continued long after Flight 428 had departed. The fallout for Meridian Air was a slow, agonizing bleed. The story of the Atlanta ultimatum became an underground legend in the aviation world, a terrifying cautionary tale whispered by flight crews and executives alike. Frank Donovan, in a desperate attempt to appease the board and save his own job, initiated a brutal internal purge. Bill Hargrove, the Atlanta station director, was forced into early retirement. Dozens of other managers and supervisors who had presided over the culture of laxity were either demoted or let go. It was a corporate bloodletting, but it was too little too late. The rot was too deep. For Brenda and Gary, the consequences were personal and absolute. Their walk of shame through the crowded Atlanta concourse was the last time they would ever set foot in an airport as employees. They were escorted to a landside office, formally terminated, and informed that a private security detail would watch them clean out their lockers. Gary, in a final pathetic act of defiance, threatened to sue. The Meridian lawyer present simply slid a folder across the table. It contained the preliminary damage estimate from the Aerovant contract suspension and the potential liability for the delayed organ transplant. The lawyer informed him that if he pursued any legal action, Meridian Air would countersue him personally for the full extent of the damages. Gary left the room in a state of silent, broken shock. Brenda, convinced her union would protect her, filed an emergency grievance. A week later, she met with a senior union representative in a sterile conference room at a hotel near the airport. The representative, a weary man who had fought countless battles for his members, listened to her story. When she was finished, he sighed and shook his head. "Brenda, what you did wasn't a simple mistake," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "You didn't just tick off a passenger. You and Gary took a lit match to a 9-figure contract and nearly got a man killed. You publicly and repeatedly violated not just company policy but federal anti-discrimination statutes. The brand damage is astronomical. There's no defense here. The union cannot and will not protect you in this. You're on your own." Brenda stared at him, the last of her hope draining away. The indifference she had shown to Jordan was now being mirrored back at her by the very institution designed to protect her. She was an outcast. The story eventually broke into the mainstream first on an influential aviation blog, then picked up by major financial news outlets. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal, in a scathing exposé on the fragility of modern corporate partnerships, wrote, "The Meridian Air meltdown serves as a brutal lesson for the modern service economy. The airline wasn't brought to its knees by fuel costs or competition, but by the arrogance of 2 gate-level employees who failed to understand that in today's transparent world, every customer could be the one who holds the power to burn your kingdom down." In the months that followed, Jordan Hayes used the immense leverage she had created to forge a new order. The independent audit of Meridian Air, conducted by a top-tier firm, was as invasive as a root canal. It uncovered a deeply ingrained culture of bias backed by years of HR data that had been systematically ignored. The final report was a damning 200-page indictment. Frank Donovan, as promised, flew to Aerovant's headquarters to personally present his implementation plan based on the audit's recommendations. The meeting was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. Jordan and her team listened as he detailed the new mandatory 8-week training academy for all ground staff, the new zero-tolerance policy on discrimination, and the creation of a new independent ethics office. At the end of the presentation, Jordan's general counsel presented him with the addendum to their master services agreement. It was a brutal document. It included the massive cultural compliance fee, the right for Aerovant to conduct its own unannounced spot audits of Meridian gates, and a new unprecedented section that was already being called the Jordan Clause. This clause guaranteed that any Aerovant employee, from the CEO to a junior intern, would be treated with the utmost dignity and professionalism. Any verified breach of this clause would trigger an immediate, non-negotiable financial penalty of $1 million per incident, payable within 48 hours. Frank Donovan signed it without a word. He was saving his airline, but he had lost his sovereignty. The positive ripples of that day spread as well. Kevin, the MBA student, was true to his word and contacted Jordan's office after graduation. He was flown to DC for a day of interviews. His final interview was with Marcus Thorne, the COO. At the end of a grueling session, Marcus smiled. "You have the analytical skills, kid. But that's not why you're getting this job." The door opened, and Jordan Hayes walked in. She shook Kevin's hand, her grip firm and her smile genuine. "Kevin," she said, "the single most valuable trait in any of my employees is not intelligence. It is integrity. At that gate in Atlanta, you had nothing to gain by speaking up, and you risked being humiliated yourself. But you did it anyway. You showed integrity. That's why you have a job here. Welcome to Aerovant Guard." A year later, Jordan Hayes stood at the podium of the FAA's annual Safety and Culture Conference. Her keynote address was the most anticipated event of the week. The audience was a who's who of the aviation world, including the new humbled CEO of a slowly recovering Meridian Air. Jordan spoke about the future of aviation, not in terms of technology, but in terms of humanity. She told the story of the Atlanta incident as an anonymized case study in risk management. Last year, she began her voice resonating through the vast hall. A partner airline of ours suffered a catastrophic operational failure. It was not caused by a faulty engine or a software glitch. It was caused by a culture that permitted its frontline employees to believe that some passengers were more valuable than others. This single cultural failure led to a grounded flight, a near-fatal medical delay, and a 9-figure hit to their bottom line. It proves a point we can no longer afford to ignore. A biased employee is not an HR problem. They are a single point of failure in your entire operational chain. A culture of disrespect is as dangerous as an uninspected engine. Both will eventually lead to a catastrophic failure. One might cost you an aircraft. The other, as we have seen, might cost you your entire airline. She then unveiled her vision for the future, the Aerovant Standard, a new Gold Star certification for any airline vendor or supplier that wanted to do business with her company. It was a rigorous set of standards for ethical conduct, cultural health, and customer dignity. She announced that Pinnacle Airways was her first certified partner, a move that sent a shock wave of competitive terror through the room. She had used the ugliest moment of disrespect she had ever faced and transformed it into a powerful lever to change an entire industry. She had proven that true power was not in the clothes you wore or the seat you sat in, but in the unwavering conviction that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. The woman they had tried to send to the back of the line had ended up at the very forefront, leading them all into a better, more decent future. The story of Jordan Hayes is a stark and powerful lesson for our time. It's a reminder that you can never truly know the power and influence of the person standing in front of you, and that respect should therefore be a default setting, not a privilege granted based on appearance. The gate agent's prejudice wasn't just a personal failing, it was a catastrophic business decision. Jordan's response shows that true power isn't about yelling or the loudest, but about leveraging your position to enforce accountability and create systemic change. In the end, a simple hoodie and a first-class ticket became the catalysts for an industry-wide revolution. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone was so completely misjudged? What do you believe is the right way to respond to that kind of everyday injustice? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. If this story inspired you, and if you believe in the power of quiet strength and hard karma, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends and colleagues, and make sure you are subscribed with notifications on, so you never miss another story of consequence and justice. Thank you for listening.